There's a strange truth about time. It doesn't just soften our memories, sometimes it sharpens them. The details we thought would fade remain crystal clear. The words someone never said. The glance they gave us at the wrong moment. The silence that told us more than any conversation could. James Garner lived most of his 85 years with a reputation for being one of Hollywood's most easygoing, gracious, and universally liked leading men, the kind of actor who could work with anyone, who never had a bad word to say about a co-star. But there was one exception. One name that, for decades, he kept locked behind polite smiles and vague compliments, until, in his twilight years, he finally let the truth slip. It wasn't about a studio feud, a pay dispute, or even a headline-making scandal. It was about trust, disappointment, and a woman the world adored, Doris Day. And what Garner finally revealed about her, after more than half a century of silence, would change the way fans saw their picture-perfect partnership forever. The early 1960s were a golden age for romantic comedies, and few screen pairings captured the sparkle, wit, and charm of the genre better than James Garner and Doris Day. Garner, the tall, ruggedly handsome Oklahoma boy who had gone from television's maverick to a bona fide leading man, was the kind of actor who seemed born for the camera, natural, effortless, unpretentious. Doris Day, meanwhile, was America's sweetheart, a sunny, wholesome, golden-voiced star whose smile seemed to carry the weight of an entire industry's desire for perfection. She was the box office queen, the girl next door everyone wanted to marry, the glamorous yet approachable leading lady studios relied on to deliver hit after hit. When they first came together in The Thrill of It All, 1963, audiences were enchanted. Garner's sly, masculine charm played perfectly against Day's effervescent warmth. Their flirtatious banter and sparkling chemistry seemed as real as any off-screen romance. The film was a commercial triumph, so naturally Hollywood tried again. A year later they reunited for Move Over, Darling, another romantic farce that had the same magic, on screen at least. In the public eye, they were a perfect match, glamorous yet relatable, sophisticated yet playful. The studio publicity machine doubled down, arranging joint interviews, playful photo shoots, and carefully crafted stories of their easy camaraderie. But behind the scenes, things weren't quite so simple. Garner would later hint, very carefully, that working with Day wasn't the effortless experience the public imagined. He respected her talent. He admired her professionalism. But he noticed things, little patterns of behavior, moments of calculated charm. And in his private journals, he recorded observations that were far less flattering than anything he'd say to a reporter. One entry in particular stood out: "She knows how to get what she wants and she knows when to play innocent." That is the dangerous part. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't gossip. It was the quiet note of a man who had seen behind the curtain, and hadn't quite liked what he found. If there was a turning point, it came during the filming of Move Over, Darling. The script called for a slapstick bathroom scene. Nothing unusual for the genre. Garner, known for doing many of his own stunts, insisted on performing it himself. It was a simple setup: a slippery floor, a mistimed step, and a comedic fall into a bathtub. But comedy has a cruel way of turning dangerous in an instant. On one take, Garner slipped harder than intended. He landed awkwardly, tearing ligaments and dislocating his shoulder. The pain was immediate, sharp, and immobilizing. Camera stopped. Crew members rushed in. And that's when it happened, the moment Garner never forgot. He looked to his co-star, and saw Doris Day standing still. No rush to his side. No hand reaching out. Just watching. Some crew members claimed she turned away. Others said she simply froze. But Garner remembered it as something colder, an almost detached stillness. "I was lying on the floor in pain, unable to move my shoulder," he would later write. "And I remember looking up and seeing Doris just standing there. Nothing in her eyes, no concern, no reaction. That told me more than words ever could." The injury required physical therapy and weeks of recovery. The physical pain healed, but Garner carried something heavier: the realization that the warmth the world believed in might have been nothing more than an act for the camera. Still, he didn't confront her. He kept things civil. They finished the film. They smiled for the press. But from that moment on, something between them had shifted permanently. Then came the second blow. Months later, studios prepared to reunite the duo for a third film. Garner had already signed on. He'd even personally championed Day for the role. And then, without warning, she pulled out. No phone call. No explanation. Just a quiet withdrawal. Rumors swirled that she'd taken a more lucrative offer elsewhere, that she wanted a break from romantic comedies, that she simply didn't want to work with him again. Garner never knew for sure. What he did know was that he felt blindsided and humiliated. From then on, he quietly declined any project with her name attached. If you were in his place, injured on set, then left behind without explanation, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up or kept the silence like Garner did? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know what you think. The final insult, at least in Garner's eyes, came years later when Doris Day published her autobiography in 1976. It was a warm, best-selling memoir, filled with charming anecdotes and candid stories about her life, her marriages, and her famous co-stars. She spoke at length about Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, and others she'd worked with only once. Garner? A few polite sentences. No stories. No shared memories. No acknowledgement of their two major films together beyond the bare facts. For Garner, it was a glaring omission, and it stung. Not because he wanted flattery but because he valued honesty. To him, the omission felt deliberate, as if she had erased him from her story altogether. When his own autobiography came out decades later, Garner didn't erase her. He dedicated a full chapter to their work together. It wasn't cruel, but it was blunt. He described their on-screen chemistry as genuine, and their off-screen relationship as polite but distant. Something about her, he wrote, had always felt slightly off. Two accounts, two truths, and a silence in between that no one could quite explain. For decades, Garner kept that silence. Friends and colleagues noticed that whenever Doris Day's name came up, his expression would change, not angry, just guarded. Some whispered theories of a personal falling out. Others believed it was purely professional. But Garner never said. Until, at 85 years old, in a quiet interview he finally did. The conversation had been a gentle look back on his career. His TV days, his films, the co-stars he'd cherished. Then the interviewer casually mentioned Doris Day. Garner paused, then sighed. I never truly forgave her. He didn't say it with bitterness. There was no edge in his voice, just sadness. Forgiveness, he explained, wasn't about the injury or the cancelled film. It was about something deeper, a betrayal of trust. She knew what she did, he said softly, and she never once owned up to it. Not a word. Not a call. Nothing. We had a chance to be something great, not just on screen but maybe even off it. But she closed that door and I never got to ask why. The admission surprised everyone, not because it was harsh but because it was so human. This wasn't the drama of a Hollywood feud. It was the quiet ache of a door closed too soon, of a friendship, maybe even something more, that never had the chance to grow. Doris Day never responded to those words. By then, she had long retreated from public life, focusing on her animal foundation and avoiding the spotlight. When she passed in 2019, the world mourned her as a radiant, untouchable icon. Garner had already been gone for 5 years. Whatever might have been said between them was lost forever. In the end, their legacy remains twofold. On screen, the perfect romantic comedy couple. Off-screen, a story of silence, disappointment, and unresolved questions. Maybe that's why their films still hold such strange power. You can watch the thrill of it all or move over, darling, and see the sparkle, the timing, the magic. But if you look closely, in certain moments between certain lines, you might catch a flicker of something else. A distance. A truth neither of them ever fully spoke. In classic Hollywood, not every story ends with a happy fade-out. Some end with the credits rolling over unanswered questions. And perhaps that's why we still talk about James Garner and Doris Day, not just because of what they gave us but because of what they didn't. Sometimes the most human part of a story is the silence it leaves behind. If you want more honest, human stories from behind the spotlight, subscribe and stay tuned.